Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Okay, so welcome back to the final day of our lecture series, day 5 of 5. So I'll be taking over and sort of wrapping up for the rest of this lecture. Thank you again so much for making this quite interesting for us as well. It's our first time working through this model with students as well. And I think it gave us a lot of ideas about how we should continue on with our research. So this is just yesterday. This was one part of the model that we were showing you. And if you remember the software, there were 5 or 6 key causal mechanisms that we tried to include. And we want you to start playing with some of these components of the system to see how it will affect short-term behavior, long-term behavior, and things like that. Most of the exercises yesterday were a lot to do with some of the challenges with model building. So once you start building the structure of the system in your mind, you want to try and understand the larger picture. One of the important steps that we were trying to work through is graphing the relationship between 2 basic components. We're trying to graph the behavior. Okay, what happens when frequency increases over time, or what happens if I stop spending money? What will happen over 30 years or 50 years or whatever time span it is that you are considering. And so another very basic assumption difference between the linear and nonlinear models would be that because of the feedback happening within the system, you will begin to see nonlinear behaviors. Something is happening, there's a feedback somewhere, and it will accelerate or decelerate certain behaviors. And that's when you start to see nonlinear behaviors. Okay? So that's why feedback exists, and that's why we also want to try and model it. So for us, we built this tool from the perspective of the operator. What can you control? What do you want to be careful about? So the scenarios or the simulations we're trying to recreate are management or operator decisions. For example, desired load factor. So as the owner of the facility, you can say, okay, we want this much of a desired load factor, or we want this much of a desired load factor. That's a subjective management decision. And maybe you can hire your system dynamics team to simulate various scenarios to inform your decision, but ultimately in the end, you have to make that decision based on what you think are the risks at that time. In this model, you'll be able to change things like frequency and price. So that's what we mean by desired load factor. And we talked about yesterday how if we're thinking 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 100 years, your decision today is not set in stone. You can actually think about the long-term impacts or the short-term impacts of specific decisions you make. And yeah, don't be afraid to change your mind or make a different decision within these long time scales. I'll show you the assignment. It has 2 parts. So the second part is mostly this, play with the model, please, and figure out what the management and policy implementation and implications are. And the question is set up because we want you to play with the model, simulate various scenarios. We want you to test and verify or refine your hypotheses about management and policy implementation. So this is sort of a very research-based approach. Okay, what if this happens? So you make a hypothesis about what you think will happen if you change this or you change this in the model, and then you test it. Okay, I have no idea why it's behaving like this. So you have to refine your hypothesis or look for another behavior. And you keep testing, and that's the verification process, or the validation process. So that's the process we hope you're going to go through to answer the second question of the assignment. Today, some questions I was hearing from the audience gave me a couple ideas of what I should also present to you. So now, this might be frustrating. So finally, you get to see a specific model that you can use and that you can experiment with. Now, again, I'm going to sort of expand the scope a little bit more and give you some more examples of how the systems approach, not system dynamics too specifically, but how some research has been guided by our systems-based thinking. So another topic we talked a lot about how some things are beyond your control as an operator. So this first paper is about how the government and the operator have to work together with manufacturers and what kind of impact it has on safety. So the performance indicator for us in the system is safety. The second paper I wanted to share was, we talked a lot about, well, who gets to change the price? How do you change the price? I will give this. We also did some case studies. One of Professor Nikko's batchmates at the University of Tokyo focused on this for his PhD, and I will present some of his qualitative research on how Hong Kong transport operators and Singapore transport operators and the government, what kind of pricing mechanisms they have in their public transport pricing policy. Yeah, and then hopefully that'll be about an hour, or just a bit less. I'm going to remind you about some of the slides in the first 2 days, and then we will have a guest talk from Professor Ashwin Mahalingam to talk about his experiences in system, and just these kinds of challenges we have in this industry, and then we'll have a wrap up and conclusions. Okay. All right. So for the first two parts, let me share one of the higher impact papers that Professor Nikko and I wrote together, an example of inter-organizational coordination in high-speed rail in Japan for managing safety risk. So the title of this paper, we mentioned it in the first day. It's called Organizational and Institutional Factors Affecting High-Speed Rail Safety in Japan. In Japan, I present this paper quite a bit. The social background in Japan would be that Japanese government and private industry are trying to export Shinkansen technology through development projects, just like the Ahmedabad line. And we've mentioned several times, exporting this hard technology is not enough. Just because you give them the signals or the trains or the rails, you don't just drop the technology and all of a sudden it works. We need to also describe and operationalize the soft or the management aspects, such as safety management. And we did this through a case study of a serious accident. The stated objective is to use systems approach to highlight organizational and institutional safety issues within the high-speed rail system. In 2017, we had the first serious accident in the Shinkansen system in decades, I guess almost since inception. And 700 is one of the most advanced cars that run very high speed between, it's the Sanyo and Tokaido, so it's running between those two profitable lines we were talking about, very, very high-performing lines. What happened was the bogie, which, where the car sits on top of, they found a crack in the bogie that, if you can tell here, it's all the way up to here. There's only maybe almost, 5 or 10 centimeters left until this entire bogie would have cracked. So luckily, the maintenance people were able to find it after the driver reported some strange sounds, and they did some non-routine maintenance to find this. And it was a very, very, very close call. We don't want to say near miss, but near miss catastrophe, basically, of an accident. And it was labeled a serious accident in the Japanese by the safety authorities as well as the operator. And it was something that everybody realized that they needed to learn from. So for the paper, Professor Nikko mostly went through all the very detailed accident reports by the Japan Transportation Safety Board, as well as the government, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Technology and Tourism, or Transport and Tourism, had hired various experts to come up with working papers and groups. We'll talk about here, it wasn't just the train operators, but the people manufacturing these parts were also part of the problem, and they also had to be involved in the investigations. And then we also took these sort of his analysis of the situation was used to then again, we interviewed some of the operator officials to talk about how they viewed the situation. Okay. So this is another, I'll say school or another branch of system dynamics called the System Theoretic Accident Model and Process methodology. So this is methodology consistent with system dynamics, but specifically for analyzing accidents. So these are the steps as indicated by the STAMP methodology. If you want to do a STAMP methodology, this is the order in which you conduct the analysis. You create a system control structure, meaning like what is the structure of the system and what is it trying to control? So you have to identify specific elements of the system. So for us, we use this not within just a company, but we realized there were government, the ministries involved, the operators involved, and the manufacturers are also involved. So they are actually different parts of the system that try and control different things when it comes to HSR. And then you find out who the stakeholders are, and you have to identify these three actions, which are inadequate control actions. So there are things you're trying to control, and that's why your system is structured that way. So this did not function in the way it was supposed to. That's an inadequate control action. That may have been caused by mental model flaws, or it could be caused by feedback flaws. So you're just looking for where did it go wrong, right? You're looking for a specific instance within the structure where the system didn't control what it was supposed to do adequately. Another important thing about the systems approach, but as relevant to the high-speed rail and infrastructure and transportation in general, would be the time scale of development and operations. So developing the system or manufacturing the parts is different from operating the system, but the same people are sometimes involved in both, and sometimes only doing parts of it, and except, different risks materialize at different parts of the operations or development phase. So you have the ministry that sets the standards early on for this is how you must develop your technology, and then they want to see and they want feedback on how it is being operated once it is manufactured and under operation. And then you have the operating company, Japan Rail, that has to provide this information to the ministry, to the regulator. Japan Rail actually outsources. Well, they have a rolling stock department, and this rolling stock department had been outsourcing some of the manufacturing processes to other companies, and one of these companies was in charge of the bogie frame. We'll see here. So the accident report that we talk about in the analysis is this is the scope of this paper. This is how we framed it, the scope. So existing practice within Japan was very much set up using this principle of safety, of redundancy, which I mentioned very quickly, I think on day 1 or day 2. A very powerful and popular principle for safety within systems is redundancy. You want to make sure things are protected at multiple levels. So even if one person or one organization doesn't recognize or they miss a risk, somebody else will be looking at the same thing, and they can pick it up. You have several safety failure mechanisms. In Japan, we have the operator. So JR has to analyze accident data to update their standards. It's part of their what's it called? It's part of their operational. I want to say. Well, they have to do it. It's their job to constantly look at accident data and analyze it, and then realize that there are certain risks happening, and they have to take steps to ensure that those safety incidents don't happen. The second redundancy would be the ministry. They share the data, and ministry is also constantly looking at the data and saying, how about this, how about this? We also have different priorities, or this region appears to be struggling, and things like that. So you have both the operator and the regulator analyzing safety data to ensure that safety is constantly being improved. Okay. So we use the systems approach. We say, look, this is how safety is being maintained in the system. Why did nobody notice that this crack appeared? So what really happened? Well, Professor Nico might need to fill in some of the details, but so as I said, a manufacturing company was in charge of creating the bogey. Rolling stock department has relationships with the manufacturers. I believe at some point they changed the company that was in charge of that specific part. Am I correct? Yes. And up until that point, basically rolling stock knows about the standards that are required, and they didn't share that information with that decision to change manufacturers was not exactly flagged as a safety risk or anything. It was just a decision that was made. And then, in fact, at the manufacturing company creating the bogey, they decided that during the manufacturing phase, they found something wasn't reaching clearance, and they decided to make it fit. They shaved a little bit off the top of the bogey here to make it fit. And it looked fine, and it was working at the beginning. And so what they found out later through sort of the structural, maybe the FEM modeling, et cetera, was that that's where the failure occurred and propagated much faster than it would have if the thickness was maintained. And then the maintenance division also didn't notice because they wouldn't have known that the thickness had changed there, and they needed to look into that area. Or any key details I've missed? I'm simplifying the story, obviously.
Yeah, it goes really technical in that way. But it was not the entire manufacturing company. But essentially, you can imagine that even the rolling stock manufacturing company will have subcontractors, right? So they were procuring a part of a sheet metal from one other company and so on and so forth. And that subcontractor actually changed, and they had a slightly different technology. So the tolerances of that sheet metal that was supplied to the company was different. And typically buying new or finding new vendor or new subcontractor is the job of a supply chain manager or a marketing manager within that company. And they did not think it is going to be a safety critical risks. But therefore, the people on the shop floor, when the new part was not fitting well, they didn't know because they were expecting that part has always fit well. So why is it this time? So they ended up doing their routine procedure of grinding it and trying to fit it with like really much grinding because they were not aware that they did not even question the fact that, hey, this could be completely new part and completely new way to manufacture this. Because of this lack of communication within the company where marketing department or people who are responsible who were creating new supply chains did not communicate, and that did not translate to the technology or change in procedure at a soft floor level, that kind of led to this issue of defect origin. But then there's a lot of interesting points of why it was not detected, even though Japan have so many points to identify quality control issues, because it's otherwise very important point. So that's, I think you're going to tell more. Yeah.
Yes. So for the paper, this is how we argued that this is what was happening. So I said there's redundancy. The regulator and the operator are both analyzing data constantly to make sure there are no safety risks in the system. Right? So what happens if there's an accident that has never happened before? Right? They're using the same data to look for potential accidents, but there was no data about bogey crack incidents that were caused by subcontractor changes. So this was a very fundamental risk in the risk management process, where we named it in effective redundant regulation. So redundancy works, but only to strengthen your ability to manage risks within your past experience. Okay, so when both the regulator and the entity being regulated, in this case the operator, if they rely on the same information and similar process to develop new standards, you cannot prepare yourself for unknown unknowns, which was another phrase we used a couple days ago. Learning from the past is what this case study really showcases, is that learning from the past, no matter how proactive you are in learning from the past, as systems get more and more complex, as relationships get more and more complex, as the interorganizational complexity increases, this approach of learning from the past will not be sufficient in a complex socio-technical system. Okay. So theoretically, here, this is where we say, okay, if this is the redundancy that's not working, if both the risk awareness of the operator and the risk awareness of the regulators are only constrained by past experience here, it means you have to create some sort of other, either data or learning from another industry perhaps. This is what we mean by the need for creating leading indicators, not just accident data, accident reports or accident databases, but leading indicators that will help you push your system to higher performance standards or higher safety standards. Okay. All right, so that's how system dynamics could be. You can also use system dynamics to also include multiple stakeholders, so subcontractors, operators, and the government, and then think about how they have to interact with each other within a system, and then you can think about the risks that are happening there as well. Okay. All right. Second topic that I think came up quite a lot yesterday, and I thought I had some good examples here, were, so, okay, how do we change the ticket price then? Who gets to change the ticket price? This is not HSR specific, but these are actual examples and case studies that we have studied. So I thought I would present these to you because I think they're quite interesting as reference. And India can or cannot use any of these in its own context. So this is a paper, the title is Balancing Affordability and Profitability in Urban Public Transport, so implications from Singapore and Hong Kong. The social background of the problem is that public transport operators always have to balance profitability and affordability. So it's called the pricing dilemma. We've talked about this a lot. If you want to go extreme and you only protect profitability, it will always get more expensive for the user. If you protect the user too much and just make it free, then obviously the operator is always going to lose money. And we conceptualize public transportation pricing as a system like this. So you have commuters pay money, and then that becomes the revenue. The revenue goes back to the operator to provide services. Public funds also exist to either give money to the operators or invest in further infrastructure for the operator, or they're either managed by the government, who could give subsidies to operators, or etc. So this is like sort of a simplified diagram of how public transportation fare is organized. And we wanted to show how two cities that are relatively similar in scale, and I would say modernity, Singapore and Hong Kong, had various experiences initiating price change, fare box change, and what impact it had on society, and therefore how that impacted the pricing dilemma. So the first example is the distance-based fare scheme. So in Singapore, the original conceptualization was hub and spoke and lots of transfers, but it was a flat fare. You just pay and then you get on, and then if you get off, you transfer, you have to pay again. So that was a little bit expensive for the people that had to make various transfers. So it was efficient because it was hub and spoke, so everyone could get to where they wanted, but people who had to make multiple transfers were frustrated with the system. Because so it was easy to design for the operator, but a little bit more cost, right? Affordability suffered for the user. So to respond to those user needs, they tried to implement the distance-based fare scheme. So this is more tap and go, but because of the technological development that happened, it's only possible because of the ETC technology, right? Before, if you try to implement a distance-based fare scheme early on without the technology, it wasn't worth it. They just said, no, it's just a flat fare because it's too much work for the operator to ask everybody how far they're going or figure out the ticketing system for changing the distance. So that's another part of how the technological innovation or technological development will impact your system. So things happened, and now they're able to implement the distance-based fare. Okay? Transfers no longer cost so much money, and then the fare went up. Yes. So as a result of the distance-based fare scheme, average fare revenue per commuter went down. So affordability went up, but revenue went down for the operator. Okay, so operators start suffering in terms of profitability. So already the direct balance dilemma is happening, and public transportation demands were growing very rapidly over the decades, and they were not able to catch up with the demand. So to try and figure out how to get more money to finance demand, because the operators started losing a little bit more money, this is where they introduced the new capacity factor fare adjustment scheme. Okay. So the Singaporean operators are allowed to raise the price to a certain amount based on a pre-identified formula. And unfortunately, that formula was not letting them raise the price so they can stop losing money. They were still losing money. So they negotiated this adding a new capacity factor. Okay, so this capacity factor was sort of designed to reflect the cost changes that include the demand needs for capacity expansion. Okay. So fare adjustments were capped at a maximum of a weightage formula that includes the consumer price index, so how much people are already paying for their consumers and products, wage index, how much money they're making, and employment index, that's 1%. So 5 plus 4 plus 1 is 10. So this is a capacity factor I think they added, I forget. And then on top of that, please let us add a new capacity factor, as I said. This is what we need to add to the fare adjustment. We want the user to start paying for a little bit so we can use that money for expanding our services. And this is calculated like this. So 50% train, 50% bus. This is the total amount of track. This is the total amount of road that the bus services cover. And then this is the total amount each passenger on average uses on that system. And then the difference between that. So if it's lower, they don't have to spend much money. But if people are obviously using more than the capacity is, then this number becomes positive, and that's how much money they need to invest in the system. So this led to adding this new capacity factor into the fare adjustment, allowed them to increase their ticket prices for about just over 4% in 1 year. And it did increase their revenues 6% or 6 cents. It only went up 6 cents for ordinary commuters, apparently, which is pretty low, I guess. But if you increase the price for everybody, then again, depending on your user, affordability will suffer. So they capped for full-time students, senior citizens, and low-wage workers. They capped the increase to 1 cent. Okay. What was I going to say here? Oh, something I also do research on is decision-making analyses. One thing here is, so this would be considered maybe multi-criteria decision-making. okay, let's include CPI, wage, and employment in our calculation for what's fair in terms of fare increases. What's fair as in justice fair, for fair as in money increases. But how do you decide on, okay, CPI is 50%, wage index is 40%, and employment is 1%? That is a very subjective and judgmental judgment you have to make. That is not a mathematical equation. That is a social decision or a political decision or a decision that must be made by either governments, the people, or you give the operator the permission to make up this decision. Somebody has to approve this weight. So you can trick the population into we have a mathematical formula to decide how much we can increase price. But math is political if you use it in the right way, right? You have to understand that this weight, this balance and distribution of how you've decided to put more importance on how much people spend rather than how much people make should impact how much they spend on transportation. Yeah, it's extremely questionable and different for each country. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, so the new capacity factor, they started seeing the prices going up for some commuters and not some other commuters. So they also started experimenting with a concession scheme. So they gave a flat 15% discount for all low-income workers, but they had to go out and find all the low-income workers, or you have to start applying and you have to approve low-income workers. So the transaction cost goes up for implementing that kind of a policy. And also some other finance schemes to enhance their service. In the end, what's interesting about Singapore is maybe the private sector the operator didn't want to take the risk of asset ownership. They didn't want to be responsible for maintenance and monitoring. They just said, all we want to do is operating, and we just give you back the rights, or we want you to have all the rights for the ownership. And we're just bidding for running services. And you get to keep the fare, just pay us a flat rate for the operation rights. Okay. Hong Kong is a very different story, I would say. Again, fare is adjusted based on this formula that includes CPI, wage, productivity factors as well. Private sector had very strong control of this price increase. Public acceptability went down over years as price just kept going up and up and up. So there was a bit of lobbying and political pressure, and then they decided that they have to start announcing publicly how they calculate the price increases. Okay, so this is what it says here. So the fare adjustment scheme originally was also capped. It set the ceiling for the fare increase at no more than the year-on-year change in the monthly median household income for the previous year. Okay. So they'll have economic data about how much people are spending and the monthly income of each household, and year-on-year, if that goes up or down, the percentage that it goes up or down. If it goes up, maybe 2% or 3%, you are not allowed to increase this price more than 2% or 3%. That's how it's capped. Yes. Okay. That's, again, started having an impact on the profitability of the operator because prices went down for some people. And then there was also some inequality in terms of who pays more for public transport as a percentage of their income. So again, to address the affordability problem, specifically for low-income workers, they started providing subsidies again for low-income travelers. So up to this amount. It was mean tested. So again, it's pretty expensive to implement because means testing means people start applying and you have to evaluate and judge whether or not they're allowed to receive the subsidy. Public transfer fare subsidy scheme. Then they also, as a result of this being quite expensive and time-consuming to implement. Hong Kong also implemented the first non-mean tested subsidy for low incomes. And this was also, again, 25% of all public transportation expenses for more than 400 Hong Kong dollars was subsidized. You can apply for a return. So this actually, richer people ended up benefiting a little bit more from the scheme, because the more you spend on public transport, the more you can get from this 25%. So that was the impact of this pricing scheme. Yeah, and they also have a similar strategy. Well, I'm not sure what's happening now with the Chinese government reforms in terms of public transportation management, but they also have a similar approach where operators are given development rights of the stations, and that's part of their business operations. Yeah. So what was really interesting about comparing Singapore and Hong Kong was that they had similar pricing schemes to address similar problems, but it was a totally different story about what was happening and the impacts that it had. So Singapore started with designing a usable and easy to use kind of system, but then they realized it was costing more for other people, and they wanted to bring the convenience down so it would make affordability better for people. And then affordability went up, but they started getting less revenue because people were not using a flat rate, and it wouldn't catch up with the capacity demand needs, the growing demand needs. So they have to find out how else to get money, and they introduced other schemes that would then also put a lot of pressure on the government in terms of the public fund. But either you ask the operator to take more financial risk, or you lobby the government to ask them to take more of the financial risk, and then how that money circulates within your system depends on the existing structure, the existing relationship or agreement about who manages the money. Is it the operator takes the money and then calculates the profit and then pays the government, or you just get usage rights and you get a payment and then you have to decrease costs, and the government handles the revenue, and within the public fund, not just transportation, but everything, to figure out how much they can use that to invest in capacity expansion or not. Unfortunately, it's still not enough, I think. They still need more money for capacity expansion. So, and then you still have to reach out to investors or the private sector, or issue bonds or borrow more money to invest in expansion. Yeah, but the story in Singapore would definitely be that people are, in general, very happy with public transportation. Public transportation satisfaction definitely went up through these decades. Hong Kong, I think, it's very market-oriented, and the profitability is very high. Some of the operators we were talking to are not happy with profitability going down, and the Hong Kong finance sector also started moving away from investing in infrastructure, because they said energy is the next sort of sector that they like paying for, because just higher profits and less risk from their perspective. Okay. This is a graphical abstract of what Dr. Zhou did. There's a transport dilemma. You're always balancing affordability for the user and profitability for the operator. If you emphasize one within the system, you are having a trade-off with the other. We used these two approaches to combine theory of change, which I mentioned, which is a linear sort of framework. We combined it with the realist evaluation to create a systems diagram to evaluate fare schemes and subsidy schemes and finance schemes that were implemented differently in two cities, using data from Singapore and Hong Kong to see what kind of impact each of these schemes had on either operator profitability or user affordability, and just saw everything kind of interacting very nicely within the system. Policy implications we are trying to argue for. This isn't published yet, so we're not sure. We're waiting for feedback, but fare levels do appear to be less effective in terms of affordability than mean tested or direct to the low income or direct to the commuter subsidies. So they're efficient in terms of the impact they have on affordability, but they are not efficient for the operator or for the regulator in terms of having to implement it. It's another project that they have to implement. Yes, and financing schemes have to respond to the changing socioeconomic context. All right. Any questions, comments, something I can clarify? Yeah, so the first example, we looked at government operator, also subcontractors and systems having an impact on safety. We want to show that systems can help explain why the safety accident happened. Second example, quite different, but just how do you change the price? It's actually very complicated how people change prices. And if you think about it as a system, yeah, if you make one decision now, it will have an impact on affordability or profitability, which means then you have to make another decision. Do you use the ticket price or do you use the government funds or subsidies? These are different ways you will affect different stakeholders within the system to have an impact on affordability or profitability. All right. So if there are no questions, I'll just keep going. That's it. I just wanted to add that to the lecture from yesterday because we were looking at very specifically the model. Again, now, I hope you're always taking in this information, thinking about how it applies to India and how it applies to us, how it applies to what we're going to be going through. So I want to go through very quickly some of the lecture material again to try and synthesize and try and think about how you can use this information and how you can use what you've learned to apply it to the problems that matter to you in India, okay? So these were the objectives again. Maybe these sentences make a little bit more sense to you now that you know what we were trying to do. So integrated risk management, complexity, we're focusing on high-speed rail as the case studies most of the time. We want you to appreciate complexity and dynamics, so interdependencies. And the frameworks and tools we're talking about are systems thinking, system dynamics. We hope that was useful for you to understand these problems. And of course, it's a tool, but the purpose of the tool is to help us think about management, how to impact management. What do we do? What are the policy that we need to think of so that this complexity can be managed successfully? Okay, so this was the model. This is a very simplified model. Maybe now you think this model looks simple, even though at the beginning of the class, this model probably looked complicated. But compared to this one, I guess it's simpler, right? This is complexity. This is also quite complex, but this is our simplified version of what we think is a very good model that enables us to simulate HSR adoption in a general context. But we used Taiwanese data to validate it, but we think the structure holds true for India as well. Okay. You're now familiar with the stocks, the flow as they build the model. Potential adopters, not willing to adopt, and then adopters, right? It's a very powerful way of separating a whole population for us. We use the Bass diffusion model. Another concept you may have heard is mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but when you are creating a system and trying to conceptualize users, this type of logical thinking is also something that you should practice, I think. There's an art to it as well, and you need to practice these logical categories of how do you create very useful, very powerful categories for separating the number of users of your system. Okay, stocks. So I mean, for HSR, I guess you can definitely borrow our adoption categorization that's based on the BAS diffusion model. But for other systems, you have to think about what kind of stocks or what kind of logical categories you want to separate stocks into. There are multiple variables. So this was the exercise you did with the assignment. So you want to zero in on the variables. There's a lot of complicated information. You want to try and identify a variable within that information. Once you can zoom in on a variable, you think about how they're connected to each other. You figure out the links, and then you identify polarity. Is it going up or is it going down? Depending on the relationship. And then when you start connecting all those together, you start identifying balancing or reinforcing loops. So is it getting worse or better or weaker? Or is it releasing pressure buildup within the system? That would be the difference between balancing or reinforcing. So the order of the lecture was definitely from left to right. So we're starting from very ambiguous mental models, and then you are thinking about how those mental models have causal relationships in it. You identify the stocks and the flows, and then you start simulating with mathematical models, right? It gets much more explicit and easier to explain. So from a modeling perspective, that's good, right? You're going more explicit, more complete. But again, people, policies are ambiguous. Society is also changing. So you also have to think about going from right to left. Systems thinking is also able to incorporate the flexibility and the dynamics, the dynamism you need to think about policy changes that you need to implement. Okay? Organizational learning has to occur because society is always changing as well. So once you create a perfect model, after a couple, days, weeks, months, or something, that model will probably not be 100% representative of the society that you're trying to impact. So you got to go back. You have to constantly change your models, and So again, this as well, metaphorically speaking, is a system, right? You're using your mental models to inform your simulations, which have to inform your mental models about how they have to change, and the system will constantly cycle through and enable you to learn from your activities. So what we really hope you will do is just you have practice, but you've only done it a couple times, and you can play with our model, which will help you maybe understand our model. But system development is a different skill set from, I think, simulations, right? You have practiced a little bit, and you understand stocks and flows and polarities and causal relationships now. Please always keep this in mind and practice. I think the exercise I gave you early on about personal problems, if you try and do it now, you will definitely come up with a completely different system than what you did only 2 days ago. Right? You'll be learning, and it becomes more elegant, what I say. So I love listening to research presentations that understand systems, because once you start doing it, you have an appreciation for elegant systems. Once you start understanding big picture problems. Okay. So this is one of the system-based frameworks that we were able to generate through our research, sort of big picture. Maybe you will appreciate these kinds of diagrams more that you see in textbooks that look really obvious. You're like, yeah, of course this makes sense. It's very obvious. But it's actually it takes a lot of work to build these kinds of high-level frameworks from the bottom up. So we drilled this into you quite a bit. This is the first question of the assignment, is that we want you to play off of these two components. So this is the HSR system that we want you to remember. The examples I gave of demand risks, safety, operational risks, technology spillovers, urban development risks, knowledge economy related risks are very specific, right? So if you remember, system development happened regionally in Japan, and there were risks associated with accessibility, like trying to make money off of one network, but after time, people wanted access to the network. a different type of priority, different type of risk. Even the structure of the organization and the financial management, because of the policy roles, would have an impact on your ability to provide timely service. So it impacts the actual human resources that you're doing as well. Always providing continuous service improvement is a very vital part of the Japanese Rail's corporate philosophy, and this is how they constantly are trying to improve services and developing new technologies so that the user is happy, but it is very much, the foundation is the coordination, efficient decision making, or financial management that enables this. And it's only enabled because of a unique organizational structure in Japan, which you'll also see is what they were trying to do in Taiwan, but then Taiwan renationalized. The example I just gave now of the metro in Singapore as well, they also renationalized some services. The public policy and the regulations about how operators are structured will also have an impact on the inside of your organization. So Europe is also structured differently, right? We're vertically separated. So what does that mean for India? Spillovers, technology spillovers. In Japan, earthquakes are just part of life. It's a problem that we need to always be careful about and always be trying to mitigate. So that actually creates technology development that spills over into other societal realms and also defines the market conditions for the Japanese companies. So what is it? Yeah, what are the social or market conditions in India what you might think are separate industries could actually benefit each other. We talked a lot about land, and land is also outside of your jurisdiction, depending on maybe how you conceptualize land. But yeah, decisions about how your system should change over time will depend on things like are we going to redesign this station, this neighborhood? Which cities should we connect together? Those are other decisions. You improve accessibility and people start moving and you'll see other changes. Even at a national level, population distribution will change. What does that mean for the people? What does that mean for the cities? Knowledge distribution will change. Patents went up and down in some cities and other cities. Talent will be redistributed in your country. What does that mean, right? 28 states and some number of unions in India. I just learned yesterday at dinner. In Europe, you have several countries that have to coordinate. Well, what does it mean for Indian states and unions to coordinate with each other? Interoperability might be top-down, but organizational culture, practices, there's still competition, I feel like, amongst regions, right? For the talent, for the people, you're going to have probably some challenges similar to Europe. I expect the Indian experience to be maybe not as fast in terms of scale as China, but the scale of the size of the market and the size of the need is similar. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, but it's the expansion and the local development of technology and what kind of risks that's going to have for Indian business, Indian development, that is also a risk and a story that is yet to be told. And then maybe like Taiwan, if things fall apart and the government has to step in, or actually, so right now you've got the government entity in charge of basically everything, I guess. Naturally, most of the time the government is constrained by public obligations and political instability and things like that. Asking the private sector for help for specific solutions is usually natural in any country. So there will probably be an element of privatization or strong coordination with private sector entities to to improve services or reach some sort of performance indicator. And if they don't deliver, what does that mean? You take it back, just like Taiwan? Do you extend the concession period like Taiwan? Those are also decisions that the Indian stakeholders are going to have to wrestle with. Okay, so all of these stories I'm telling, all of these risks we're talking about, we want to think about what does it mean for India? What does it mean for India? Okay, so that's the purpose of my assignment question. I'll share it with you quickly, but this is a summary of question 1 out of 2 in the assignment. So we want you to just remember this figure, remember these 5 risks, choose one of these risks, not the figure, choose one of these risks, and we want you to have I want you to discuss what does it mean for India? What are the possibility of such risks, one of these 5 risks happening in India? And so you can write more words to help you with the assignment. You break down your answer into these 4 parts. So which stakeholder are you talking about for the risk? What's causing the risk, maybe, if you can identify it? And what part of the framework is relevant? So when I talk about this risk, this is societal risk, or this is happening here. This will be risky for the operator here, or this will be risky for the government here. Stuff like that. And then what is the mitigation strategy? What can you do? What can this stakeholder do? That's it for the first question. 1 or 2 pages I wrote. We ask you to talk about that. Okay. This is the assignment. Consider this framework. Consider the 5 risks. I want you to go through some news articles, internet articles, reports, or papers about Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail. There's lots of news out there, lots of stories, and then use that to help you inform, okay, this risk is maybe relevant for us, okay? And discuss the possibility and causes of the risk happening. So clarify which stakeholder the risk you describe is significant, describe the causes of the risk, potential cause. Clarify which part of this system is relevant to the risk you're talking about, and then discuss possible effective risk mitigation strategies. Okay, so that's it. I don't think this will take more than 1.5 pages, so maximum 2 pages. I will not read beyond 2 pages. So you can submit as many pages as you want, but I only read the first 2 pages. So yeah, maximum 2 pages. But I think 1.5 pages is enough. So the second question is, we want you to focus on the desired load factors, but focusing on ticket price. Oh wait, sorry, hold on. We're giving you 6 possible scenarios that you can model or simulate with the model, with the combination of the base ticket price and whether or not you want to change that price. So 3 different prices, 2 options for the 3 prices. So only 6 scenarios. Simulate the result, and then we want you to interpret those results by saying which one is the most optimal for who, and explain the behavior you are observing.
So here the stakeholders are operator and then government.
Yes.
Or 3 stakeholders.
Yeah, I think this is for the passenger, maybe, if you want to think about the passenger, and the operator, and the regulator, yeah, government, yes.
And we have to draw the diagram.
Yes, that would be the better way to describe the behaviors. So not just with all words, but a simple diagram of the causal link for this is going down because this is happening. This is going up because this is happening. This kind of a sentence just to describe the simulation results you will see. Right? Nikhil, you think I don't want to give away the answer, but government, operator, maybe the passenger. Yeah, you know,
Local politics, whatever. If you
yeah.
can have
If you're interested in some other dynamic and you want to make the assignment complicated for yourself, you can think up another stakeholder, I guess, that might be involved, like technology
you can read
development.
the first 2 pages.
But I only like to read 2 pages. So, okay. Question 2. So it's mostly based on the scenario, simulation results, and your interpretation of them. And this one's a little bit more open-ended, I would say, about the various types of risks that we might see in India. Okay. No? Any more? All right. So yeah, that was a very great, I think that was a very great wrap-up of it's not just the technical details that will help you implement solutions. In the end, leadership's going to matter. Maybe I'll just start there. I'm sorry. That was actually sort of my last message as well. Going back to the model, yeah, it's always we're thinking how this applies to the Indian context, right? So what will be the challenges here in developing the system? What will be the challenge that you need to address, and therefore how should the system evolve, right? What is it? How does the development happen over time, and what does that mean for operations? These are the very real questions that we have to think about in the future and now. These are some of my opinions, I think, just coming from the academic side and just listening to the problems when I interview people. But yeah, I think so. Local solutions, local capacity is a key issue. Some people mention the unique risk profile of the Indian commuter. So safety, I think, is going to be, it's a very local problem, but it might be unique to the Indian context. So how do we maintain, improve, constantly deliver safe services? And that's part of quality and reliability, I think. But yeah, these are the operator level problems that I think everybody constantly faces. But there's no theoretical answer that solves this for you, right? It's always a management and system operation and learning process. So India is going to have to decide on its own. Well, they have the decision about what they need to develop and how the system needs to evolve. Maybe a specific example that's easier to understand is right now, do you import the technology? Imports will have their own risks. They will solve certain risks like time, or it might increase some risks like cost. But the same thing happens when you decide to commit to local capacity building. Local capacity building will also have time risks. It will take longer. It may address financial risks. So it's always a trade-off, and you have to think about what would be good for India right now. Yeah, some keywords that came up that we thought were interesting. Sorry about the font. Again, the model is just Professor Nikhil's model. What do you want to model? What do you want to simulate? These are interesting research questions. We heard some people talking about maybe the environmental consciousness of the passenger will impact their willingness to adopt. That's interesting to think about. Social issues, CSR, gender equality, big social issues that are impacting the behavior of commuters. And yeah, it would be very cool to try and model these things. Funding agencies want to see the impact that their infrastructure investments are having on social issues like gender equality or sustainable development indicators beyond infrastructure and measurable indicators. That's a part of the policy, evidence-based policy approach that funding agencies also want. Population dynamics are just massive and huge in India, so the problems are not the Western, North American, or even Japanese solutions I don't think they scale the same way. So even the math is probably not going to be the same here. Yeah, and who is going to use it? The commuter? Are you talking about tourists? Or are you talking about the business, trade, economic corridors? Who are you trying to connect? These are all uniquely Indian problems. And then also technology development. We don't know what's going to happen, and technology is rapidly evolving. So things I think that we're going to become very important for our research field is things like analyzing the risk of incorporating AI in the decision making or any sort of system behavior. Just like maybe the Chinese case study where we talked about, there was a little bit too much trust in advanced technology and it led to an accident. If you trust rapidly evolving but high-performing AI technology too much, there's going to be some risk associated with trusting these kinds of outputs too much. Decentralized networks, there's a little bit of work on blockchains and uploading the specifications or BIM models on blockchains, these kinds of security issues about the system. Quantum computing is probably going to happen in a couple decades, maybe in the industry a bit sooner. But what does that mean for the industry and what does that mean for operations? Automation is going to happen. All these innovation technologies are going to impact how we use day-to-day facilities. And you have to stay ahead of the curve if you want to be a part of that change, right? And that was definitely the key issue that I took away from Professor Mahingalam's talk. You have to be a leader. You are part of the solution. You are part of how this system is going to evolve. Please don't consider yourselves as just, the bureaucrats or the administrator that has to just say, oh no, I'm just in charge of operations. I don't care about how the system needs to develop. That's not my job. That's your job. This kind of that's the mentality that goes opposite to leadership. There's even a concept called meta leadership that I've mentioned a couple times. It becomes not even the leadership within your organization, but very influential leaders are people that know how to collaborate outside of their organization. So interorganizational communication becomes key as you move up and up and up in an organization. So as the operator, you have to know people in the government, or in the government, you have to understand the operator needs and priorities. Something one of my professors told me here that really resonated with me, which is easier for a young person to understand, I think, is that he said, when you start working, you have to do what your boss says. That's very easy to understand. You'll have a boss and she's going to train you, and you have to understand that she has priorities, and your job is to sort of support her. But if you're smart, you're going to be a leader, so you should understand your boss's boss's boss. At least understand 3 levels. 2 is okay. A normal smart person understands your boss has a boss, but you at least at the minimum think your boss's boss's boss. What is her priority? What's his priority? That helps you understand that everyone has pressure, everyone has jobs to do, and your job is part of the picture. And you have to understand why your boss is asking you to do this. Right? Sometimes you don't understand, but if you understand that they also have a boss and a boss, it helps you understand and make more efficient decisions, I think. And that's when the further up you go, by the end, you're at the top, and then you need somebody else's help. That's when the interorganizational leadership and your relationships outside of the organization really, really help. Communication and stakeholder management, that's another research topic I'm very passionate about, so I also like to emphasize this, which was mentioned just now. Your technical solutions are only going to be as good as your ability to communicate them with the team. So I think logical thinking skills, logical thinking practice is important for presenting your argument. Systems thinking will help you show the big picture to your audience, and communication skills are necessary even for engineers. So I think engineers now are starting to appreciate that that need communication skills. It's not just your technical expertise, but the communication skills are key. Another story I have here, one of my seniors, very successful in the consulting industry. I remember he came back and he was talking about how grateful he was to our professor who really emphasizes the need for communication skills. He became a consultant very early on in his career. They had a business contest, make your pitch, and if it's the best, you'll to implement the idea in the organization. And he specifically remembers now that he was not the smartest, and he knows that other people had better ideas. He was the only one that was able to communicate his idea. People smarter and with better ideas than him that did not, made no sense. The communication was not there. But the best ideas, if the other people don't understand it, it's gonna die. So working on communication skills is part of your idea, of your ability to leadership in the organization. And yes, please don't be a leader. I know it's like nobody wants to be a leader. It's when you have to tell people what to do, but of leadership, I think, in general. So all of you, I think your organization is going to ask you to become a leader. You don't level. So embrace it and please be prepared. Yeah, and I think hopefully some of the tools and the concepts last week will help you in your careers. And of course, details about the research or just ideas about implementation or anything. I'm very happy that anybody is interested in this kind of material. For me, thank you so much for participating, and hopefully you learned. I learned a lot as well. I'm very happy that you were so engaged, and yeah, I'm very much looking forward to hearing about your future endeavors and yeah, your support of the systems thinking approach.